What's up, everyone? This is another episode of The Sea Life, and I am here with our guest for today. His name is Michael Wong, and he is the CEO of a company called Genea. Michael, it's good to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get into your background, which is an interesting kind of transition between finance and investing and then actually being an owner-operator, can you tell us a little bit about what your company does? Sure. And then kind of we'll go back into the story from there?
Sure. So Genea is a software company. We have software in the cloud, and our cloud-based software plugs in through the internet directly into high-rise office buildings typically. And once we're plugged in, and specifically what we're plugging into is the HVAC systems. And once we're plugged in, what our software allows a property to do is to allow the tenants in the property to turn on their overtime HVAC after all the main equipment turns off after the end of business hours. And so there's a convenience to the tenants. Think about it as we've been likened to Nest for the office market with a billing component, because when you turn on overtime HVAC, you get charged by the hour. And so we do the automation of turning on the equipment, we automate the billing component, and all that information flows into their accounting software. So that's one of the things we do, but we're essentially a software company for commercial real estate.
So obviously this sounds like a very specific solution to a problem that commercial real estate or commercial property managers would face.
Sure.
Because if you want, so these are all on automated timers, right? Like office building opens in the morning, the stuff turns on and it shuts down in the evening. And if you want something outside of that, you have to get a property manager to do it for you.
Yeah. So think about a typical office building where they have, it's not typical that they have package units like you have in your home. To turn up for HVAC, they have massive shared equipment, right? And so if you're in a multi-tenanted building, so you're not the only tenant in the entire building, but there's other tenants in the same building. When a building owner figures out how to operate that equipment, do they run it 24/7, 365 days a year? Absolutely not, right? Because people aren't generally around 300, and 24/7. So they define in the standard lease business hours, and that's when for a full service lease, we're going to provide you with use of the space. We're going to give you HVAC, you have security access. We're going to take care of landscaping. All that's included in your rent. But if you need to stay late or work over the weekend after those hours, when all the equipment's turned off, you can turn it on. You have to let us know. Typically, if you don't have the Genea system, you'd have to let us know in advance. We'd have to program it with our engineers and turn it on and bill you for it. And so we just make that whole process easier. So it could be a Sunday at 3 o'clock. I get a call from somebody and I need to go into the office. Through my iPhone app, I can just go ahead and turn on my space. Doesn't turn on the entire building, turns on my floor.
Oh, wow.
And then at the end of the month, I'll get an invoice for it. And so before Genea, that used to be a very painful process for the tenants. I would have to, either let the property team know 24 hours in advance, or I would have to call somebody, over the weekend, chase down an engineer and bother them and see if they can remotely turn it on. So took it from a very inconvenient process for the tenants, process for the property team to provide the access, and they used to have to create invoices for those overtime HVAC charges. We automate that entire thing. So you're right, it is a small niche within the operations of a typical office building, but it's a very important one. Because think about if you have a building full of attorneys or finance people that are coming in, after hours all the time, we get a lot of positive feedback that thank you so much for making it more convenient for me to access this stuff, right? And when you look at the backdrop, this is kind of going a little bit into our business more than I expected, but when you look at the backdrop of the industry right now, over 50%.
Sorry, the HVAC industry or
the workplace.
Okay.
So in the work environment, within the next couple of years, 50% of the workforce are going to be millennials. And what are millennials? What do they expect? They expect everything to be convenient via their phone, right? And so we're bringing that level of convenience to them in an office building. So we already talked about Nest, just bringing more convenience to the home. The IoT of things, tenants are expecting that. The workers are expecting that in their office environment. And so we fit very well into that, right? No longer do you have to let us know in advance as a property team if you need HVAC. It's on your phone.
And from an energy consumption standpoint, like you guys are helping to eliminate waste in some capacity, right?
Perfect question. So we'll get into my story on being a finance person, but my whole background is, numbers, finance, which is good because in the world of real estate, most real estate owners are very focused on the numbers. Just because it's cool technology doesn't mean that a building owner will adopt it. It needs to make financial sense, right? Where's the payback? Where is this going to help my ROI at the end of the day? And so there's really 4 value propositions we bring with our Overtime HVAC product. First is tenants want it. So the number one core competency or goal for any property team is keep the tenants happy, because it costs 4 or 5 times more to replace that tenant if they leave than to keep the existing one. So keep your tenants happy. But when you make it more convenient for Overtime HVAC, what happens is tenants tend to use it more. And a little bit of a secret in the industry is that Overtime HVAC tends to be a profit center for a lot of building owners. So one of the things I loved about our value prop is most software companies, they help you make things more efficient, help with cost savings. Here we can help drive the top line, which is unique. So tenants like it. We help incrementally drive some additional revenues. We definitely help with process efficiency, right? One of the things I've noticed about this industry is property managers and building engineers are flat out busy all the time. Like they're constantly putting out fires, and they don't have enough staff. And so if we can automate more of their workflow and on stuff that they shouldn't have to be manually doing, it's good. And then you touched on one that isn't so obvious, but there's an energy savings component to what we do. So what is that? We provide energy savings in a very practical manner. So remember I mentioned lease hours. Mondays through Fridays are typically defined as lease hours between 9 and 6 or 8 and 6. And then Saturdays, most leases include a Saturday half day of 8 to 1, 9 to 1 in that type of time period. But most buildings aren't fully occupied on Saturdays 8 to 1 or 9 to 1. So 93% of our clients, instead of automatically running HVAC on Saturdays, hoping people show up, they default to being turned off, and they let the tenants know, look, we're not going to charge you for it if you come in and you use it, but we're not going to keep it running hoping you show up. Just use the Genea app, turn it on if you need it, but we're going to default to being turned off. So it's a very energy efficient way in a practical manner.
Sorry, we're getting really into this, but I think it's really interesting. So you help the property managers and building owners maintain tenancy through tenant improvement.
Yeah.
So obviously any sort of TI stuff that you're pitching needs to makes like that there is a value to that from the property manager or the building owner, but then obviously that comes at a cost, and so you offset that cost by adding top line revenue from the overtime HVAC hours and things like that. So it as you're describing it to me, it sounds like a no-brainer.
Yeah, we get that all the time.
What is it do you have any big hang-ups, or is it just the shift to technology that causes a hindrance in adoption, or what do you get hung up on when you're pitching this to commercial real estate?
So by far and away, our biggest competition is apathy.
Okay.
And I'm not kidding. And so in the backdrop of property teams being flat out busy all the time, one of the things that they struggle with is we'll do the presentation. Here's what the value will bring. Here's all the customer feedback from everyone in this market who uses us. And oftentimes the meeting will go, wow, that's a no-brainer. And then we won't hear from that, property team or the engineering staff for months. And part of it is because they leave that meeting and then they're putting out fires and they're putting out fires and they're putting out fires. And it just doesn't rise to the level of priority where they can focus on doing it. Now, what's interesting is that part of what we do is we take work off their plate. So what they don't realize is that part of the reason why they're going to love us afterwards is all those fires and all the manual processes that are keeping you from putting us in, we're helping you. We're going to help you with some of that. Just get us implemented and you'll reap the benefits.
Does it take is there a large amount of capital or work?
Zero.
Zero?
So one of the, one of the things I was able to help bring to this company was it had technology that had already been adopted by a large real estate company in California, one that's very well known in Southern California. And so I knew that there was value to the real estate market. And so my thesis in making my investment in Genea and becoming a part of it was, let's take this core technology that was valuable for one company and let's see if we could roll it out to the rest of the country, maybe the rest of the world, because this company that, it's Irvine company, this company that was using it is a very, well-respected, sophisticated operator of office buildings. If they found value in it, I bet you others will as well. Right.
Yeah.
So that was my thesis.
So the fact that this company already had Irvine company as a customer, you're like,
was a data point.
Yeah, they don't make poor decisions about this kind of stuff. So
that was essentially the thesis. Where the company historically had fallen down was in some of the strategy. So prior management that I had met thought that the best way to price it was to do a shared model. So if we help you generate an incremental dollar of revenue, or if we help you save an incremental dollar of energy savings, we get a percentage of it. And so I remember the management team at that point told me that, and it's like, isn't that a great idea? And this was when I was an investor. I said, it sounds good in theory. It'll be horrible in practice. And they're like, why? We're partnering up with our clients. We share in the benefits. I said, here's the problem. If the value proposition is as good as you say it's going to be, the real estate clients are going to have to write big checks. They don't like writing big checks. More importantly, you never want to be in a business where every month you're negotiating your invoice with your clients. So you present them with a bill of 25% of the revenue increase and energy savings is this. You owe us this amount. They're going to scrutinize it and say, well, hang on. The baseline that we're comparing it to isn't accurate, or the revenue increases because we leased up the building another 10%, and that's really what drove it. Why are we paying you a percentage of that? What you want to do is price it as a tool that could be affordable in any given building and have them roll it out in their entire portfolio. That's how you gain scale. And so that's basically what we kind of migrated to, is get rid of that shared benefit model, price it as an affordable monthly fee with no upfront costs. So we give away the implementation. We're willing to invest our time and effort to implement a building. You don't pay us a monthly fee until we go live. And that monthly fee is predicated on how big the building is. We want to make it affordable. So big buildings make more money and they have more tenants than smaller buildings. So we have a pricing scale, but it's very transparent, very, very clear. And just to kind of wrap that up, all we ask for is a 12-month commitment. So nothing up front. Pay us a monthly fee for 12 months, and at the end of 12 months, if your tenants don't love it, if you're not seeing the value proposition that you anticipated, unplug us. We didn't do our job. And we've had 99% customer retention.
Okay, I was going to say, retention must obviously be high.
So that, we're willing to bet on ourselves because time and time again, we know we're right.
Yeah.
And then the other litmus test that I kind of look at pointing to as a success benchmark of our company is our Net Promoter Score. So our Net Promoter Score is a 73, which puts us above Apple. So not only do our customers use us, but I know for a fact they love us, because the Net Promoter Score is basically, in my opinion, one of the truer ways to measure customer satisfaction. Are you willing to recommend this to somebody else, that they should use it? And so, our entire team understands that those are the success metrics that we focus on. Customer retention, Net Promoter Score.
Cool. Fascinating. Let's jump in a little bit more to you and your background.
Sure.
So you mentioned that you had a background in finance, how you weren't always a CEO. So where did you get your start in business, and what did the trajectory of your life look like at that point?
Sure. So I grew up in Northern California, decided to go to UCLA for undergrad. Had a great experience there. Met my wife there, and then the day I graduated, if you were to ask me what I wanted to do, I would have told you I wanted to run a business. But as a newly minted undergrad, I wasn't being given CEO opportunities. So instead of going an operating route, I decided to go to investment banking. And the big reason for that was very simple. I knew I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I didn't know what industries I wanted to focus on. So I wanted to get into a business that would expose me to a ton of different things.
Mm-hmm.
And so investment banking did that. I first worked at a company called Solomon Brothers, and then within a year pivoted to, fortunately, to a company called DLJ, Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette, which I don't know if you've heard of DLJ, but when Drexel blew up, Michael Milken's firm,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the top bankers ended up at DLJ. And so it became one of the hotshot Wall Street banks, happened to be based in West LA. So worked 100-hour weeks, worked my tail off.
And were you just kind of entry level?
So I was an investment banking analyst. So relative to other jobs coming out of school, paid pretty well, but it was definitely combat pay because you're definitely working very, very hard.
It was a decent overall pay, but when you break it down by hour.
Yeah, exactly. We're making less than minimum wage. But that actually was probably one of the best things for me, because as a young adult trying to figure out what you want to do, the best thing you could ever hope for is just give me experience, give me exposure, get me exposed to as many things as possible. And that's what DLJ did for me, is it got me into all kinds of different industries. It got me exposed to some of the brightest minds on Wall Street. So to this day, I'm still very good friends with a lot of the people I knew from DLJ. It's like, when you're going through combat in that type of sense, you build some pretty long-lasting relationships. So.
And did you, because you're what, 22, 23 years
Mm-hmm.
old at this point, did you have is this a retrospective view of it, or in the moment did you know, hey, despite how hard this is, I'm gaining this valuable experience and I'm learning?
Oh, no, it sucked, and I hated it. But I also knew that it was the right thing for me to do. And that's, I have a 18-year-old son and a 16-year-old son, and my daughter's 11. And I tell them that all the time, is when you come out, the best thing you could ever hope for is the opportunity to work your butt off and just get exposed to a lot. So so I did that for a number of years. And actually, as a side story, and we won't get into politics, but one of the better or more high-profile deals I worked at when I was at DLJ was a $1.6 billion financing for Donald Trump. So at a 23-year-old age or 24-year-old age, I was on Donald's plane with them for 3.5 weeks, traveling around the country doing a roadshow with a small group of people. So it's that type of experience. That obviously is, a certain level of profile, but I definitely had other experiences like that with not the Donald Trumps of the world.
Yeah.
So did that for a couple of years, and as much as I thought it was a great experience, I wanted to get a lot deeper into understanding businesses and industries than what I was learning in investment banking, because when you're advising companies on a financing or you're advising companies on some sort of mergers and acquisitions transaction, you get to know the businesses maybe an inch or 2 inches deep. And then once you kind of earn your fee, you can move on and you don't really live with the decisions that you make. And so I wanted to understand businesses and industries a mile deep. And so the next logical step for me was to get into private equity.
Now, is this, again, are you still thinking this is all sort of like my R&D phase for eventually running my own business?
No, at this point, I'm just basically, this is kind of my path, right?
Okay.
My path got chosen for me. And
But you decided that the path you were going down, you wanted something that had like more involvement and a deeper understanding of these companies.
Correct. So, a lot of people at a young age, think private equity is a pretty cool industry, and I was enamored by it because you really do get to, when you think about it, you're doing due diligence on a potential company that you may want to buy, and if you buy it, then you have to live with it, right? And the whole idea is, make a good decision on the industry and this company specifically as it relates to its competitive, place in this industry, and that it will, not only survive but grow, right? Because eventually you want to sell this and make money on it, and that's how that's the whole point of private equity, is you want to make money for your investors. So interviewed with a few firms. I got super lucky. The firm I ended up working for is Blackstone in New York, back when there was only 18 investment professionals in the private equity side of Blackstone.
Wow.
So, this is where I think ignorance is bliss. I didn't truly appreciate at the time, having a Monday morning meetings with Steve Schwarzman, Glenn Hutchins, Dave Stockman, some of the founding fathers of other large private equity firms. I was being exposed to that on a weekly basis and just hearing how they thought about industries and companies and so once again, this took me from Southern California, lived in New York for a couple of years, loved the New York experience, but worked my tail off. And so, I never went back to business school. That was essentially my business school, is kind of being in that environment.
And same thing, you like an analyst at Blackstone, you kind of like trying to work your way through the ranks.
Correct. Okay. So you're doing a lot of financial modeling, you're doing a lot of research, a lot of analytical work, and then but you're being exposed to decision making, like here are the major variables in how we're looking at this investment. Because most deals, what I've learned is most deals come down to maybe a handful of critical decision points, right? You'll figure out the industries and the dynamics, but whether or not you want to, do a deal, it really comes down to a handful of key critical judgments. And so the smarter investors that I've noticed are better at, figuring out, which side of those 5 decisions you want to be on, and the ones that aren't as good, they have a less, stellar track record.
And how old are you at this point when you're kind of working your way?
I'm in my mid-20s.
Mid-20s?
I'm in my mid-20s, which is, it's crazy because I know plenty of people in my company that are in their mid-20s. And, once again, you want to get exposed to a lot. And I definitely got exposed to a lot.
So if you don't mind, like just on the personal side of things, you have this, it seems to me like you have this work ethic where you're going through these different experiences and kind of just like doing grunt labor, a lot of grunt labor. And for a lot of people, that this idea of patience and kind of wondering, or wanting to cash in on the work you've put in and holding on to delayed gratification. Like, what was that like for you as in your mid-20s? Like, did you battle the temptation of like, how long am I going to be just in the trenches for?
Sure.
And then thinking about when that would eventually culminate into something more significant.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I did a lot of this in the mid to late 90s. And towards the latter part of the 90s, you start seeing the internet boom, right? At least the first boom that eventually busted. And so in the backdrop of working, very long hours and doing a lot of the lower level analysis in financial modeling, to hear of colleagues that had left this grind to go work at technology companies that then, at least on paper, looked like they had made a fortune in a short amount of time. It definitely was something that was being noticed by me and others. For me, I wasn't at that point in time, I didn't have the risk profile for me personally to make that leap. I knew what I was doing was going to pay off for my end goal. So I was willing to kind of just stick with it, knowing that, a lot of these stories were great, but at some point, if it blew up, it was harder to pivot back into doing what I was doing. It's kind of the way I looked at it.
Gotcha.
At the time I was engaged when I was in New York, and my wife ended up making that decision to try an internet startup. And so we were kind of hedged a little bit within our household.
Yeah.
Where, I'll stick to kind of doing what I'm doing, and I know this is a good career and where I'm doing pretty well. And she took kind of the more riskier bet. Gotcha.
And so from your perspective, it was this, you were navigating this blend of patience and wanting to kind of delayed gratification.
Correct.
With a little bit of being risk averse.
Correct.
Okay.
And it's interesting when you look at this environment today, especially, we can genericize, the commentary in the millennials, but I do see that there are incredibly smart people, young people right now. And one of the biggest risks that I see among that younger generation is the ability to grind, right? And to be patient and to not expect to have a C-suite title in your 20s. Look, there are clearly exceptions to that where people definitely earn it and do a great job. But I would say it's hard to shortchange experience. You gain wisdom through experience, and you can't accelerate that without missing some things. I've definitely learned that.
So people are trying to create when they expect the culmination of their work to pay off is not true to what is real.
It's like building a house, right? If you're trying to build a house, and if you take some shortcuts on the foundation, guess what? You'll have a house, but it may not hold up for too long. And I do think when you're building a career, I do think you have to have a really strong foundation.
So you're at Blackstone. You are learning. You're in your mid-20s. You're developing skill sets, building. Being educated by really, really brilliant minds in the industry. And then what's kind of the next evolution of that for you?
So geography was the next one. Okay. So having been born and raised in California, New York was a great experience. But I remember a buddy of mine got married when I was living in New York, got married in California. So flew back out here, got out of LAX, rented a convertible, I think it was a Mustang, drove down to San Diego, and I just kept on thinking to myself, I miss California. I really do. So I knew that I wanted to pivot back to being on the West Coast. Fortunately, a bunch of my former colleagues at DLJ had moved to a private equity firm called Leonard Green in West LA. So I was interviewing with a few firms, got an offer to come back to the West Coast, and I ended up at Leonard Green, and that was a great experience. I spent about 10 and a half years there, and that's, I would say, where I grew up. I learned from some very, very smart partners at Leonard Green. I think I have never been able to tell them directly how much I learned from them, but as years go by, a lot of the things I kind of pull from myself come from my experiences at Leonard Green, specifically from some of the senior people there. And so I worked there kind of as a junior, and then rising into a mid-level to senior level person there. Towards the last 3 years I was there, I was heading up our investments in technology, media, and telecom. If you've heard of Leonard Green before, it's got a very well-known reputation for owning a lot of retailers. Okay. So Leonard Green's owned Petco, Container Store, a huge stake in Whole Foods, Shake Shack, David's Bridal, Leslie's Pool Mart, a lot of Neiman Marcus, a lot of well-known retailers. So that's about half the portfolio. The rest of the portfolio is business services, kind of a smattering of other industries, healthcare. And so I was really trying to figure out if there was a technology, media, or telecom investment that made sense. I did that for about 3 years. And actually that's when I was in that role, that's when this little investment opportunity in Genea came across my desk. And this was in 2007 when it was way too...
Which is a great time to buy a business, right?
It was, valuations were high. A year later, things kind of start falling apart with the financial crisis. But Genea was way too small to be a Leonard Green deal, because at that point in time, at LGP, they were writing $100 to $300 million equity checks, buying billion-dollar businesses. This was a tech startup, essentially.
Gotcha. How long had the company been in existence at 2007?
Yeah, there's a little bit of history there. So the company was founded by a guy that came out of the building HVAC systems, that came from that world. Okay. And between understanding those systems and then spending the second half of his career on the property management side, he saw this level of automation that was missing. And so he then started his own HVAC or EMS, energy management system distributorship, selling Johnson Controls. And as he was successfully growing that business, created the first version of software that automated that missing link of automation. And that was our first version of our software. So that used to be server-based software that would be sent out to a physical building. And then instead of an iPhone app or an Android app, the interface back then was a touch-tone telephone. If you needed HVAC, you would use a touch-tone telephone to get access to it.
Gotcha. Because I was going to say 2007 is when the first iPhone comes out, right? So
correct.
So all this smartphone technology and IoT was only like becoming a concept.
Correct.
So how did you?
So when he founded the company, to answer your question, he founded the company and called it the late 90s, early 2000. And then when I first met the company was in 2007 when he said, hey, this software, not the HVAC systems business, but the software business is looking pretty compelling. Let me try to get some outside financing to really grow that business. And he brought in some outside management.
Gotcha. And so when you see it, you're seeing a company that's addressing a gap in the market in conjunction with the perspective of like, really, really innovative technology.
Sure.
And that's what made you think, hey, I'm going to leave this really great job.
Well, so the story takes a twist.
Okay.
So in 2007, I see the company. And, as a lifelong investor at that point in time, there's certain things I kind of look for in very compelling companies. And Genea, in my opinion, had the opportunity to check mark every single box. Hadn't built it yet, but I said, I think this one could be one where it could check every single box. It addresses a very large market, commercial real estate. So as far as the eye can see, you see large buildings. I thought you can build a recurring revenue model, which we have done. I thought that the software was going to, based on what I could see, would have high margins. So the underlying cost of providing this service wasn't going to cost very much, so you make a lot of money. And I thought the ability to retain customers was going to be high. So larger addressable market, high retention, be able to grow the business pretty quickly and have large margins. I thought this is pretty compelling. Two things I didn't like in 2007 though. This is before the burst, right? And so the valuation that the company was looking for was really high. And the management team that the founder had brought in, I didn't think had a good strategy, which we already kind of talked about it.
Yeah, some of that had to do with the pricing model.
The pricing model, the go-to-market strategy, a lot of the things that I would that I thought would make sense, I didn't see with this management team. So I basically told the company at the time, here's what I don't like. Here's the things I do like. Good luck. If you're willing to address those two concerns, valuation and management, let me know.
Yeah.
So,
but again, you're a little bit tied because could you have made a deal, like a small deal like that?
Sure. This would have been for me personally.
For you personally, okay.
So it wasn't on behalf of Leonard Green anymore. This was just me analyzing this for myself.
Gotcha. So you're looking at it thinking Correct. In terms of your own stuff.
Yeah, my own balance sheet. So then, as fate would have it, 4 years later, I get a call. This is after the financial crisis, and basically the feedback was, a lot of bad things have happened as you anticipated. Would you take another look? And so I took another look. I said, here's what I think you should do with the business. Here's some things I would consider. And the board came back and said, well, we certainly want your investment, but how about you come run it? So remember that kid out of UCLA that always thought he wanted to run a company?
Yeah.
This was a fateful decision for me. So at the time I was in YPO, so we've talked about YPO a little bit offline. And I remember talking to my YPO forum at the time. Here's a crazy idea. Should I even entertain making an investment in this, very much of a startup company? I've never run a company before. Should I take on the CEO role? And the feedback was interesting. The feedback was, look, we have operating issues that we bring to forum all the time, and you have very insightful perspective on it because you've sat on boards, you've seen so many different companies that you've absolutely been helpful for us in running our businesses. You absolutely can run your own company. So it's based on that encouragement that I made that decision to go ahead and take that leap. Wrote a check. It was November 15th, 2011. I remember the day. I wrote a check, became the CEO and the single largest shareholder in Genea, and made that pivot.
Wow,
yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So at this point, now 4 years later, what was, you mentioned a lot of bad things that happened, but what was the biggest component was going to be, how are they going to leverage technology in terms of making it, like you said, instead of this kind of touch tone, like more primitive concept, into making it really streamlined in terms of the user technology. Where were they at in that process?
So in the course of the 4 years where I wasn't involved, they had migrated the technology to the cloud. So it was now cloud-based technology as opposed to, buying a server. Remember when software was distributed via DVDs and physical devices would it was what you would buy to load software onto your computer.
Yeah.
Now almost everything's cloud based. They had moved away from physical devices holding the software that you would buy to now cloud based. So that was good. But pretty much everything around the company outside of that was completely broken. There was the balance sheet was completely upside down. They were losing a ton of money. There was no recurring revenue, or virtually no recurring revenue. The team that was there wasn't being paid on a regular basis. So you can imagine, either the people that are left aren't ambitious enough to find another job, or not capable of finding another job. So of that team of roughly 20 people, the only 2 people that are left as a part of my team, there are 2 of them, and they're fantastic.
Wow.
I'm very fortunate to have Annie and Brian as still part of our team. They've been very key parts of the success story, but basically had to build a brand new team.
Wow.
And in essence, what happened was when I took over the company, I get in, I start. Immediately, you're just trying to figure out where all the skeletons are buried and where all the warts are. Immediately after I figured, okay, there is a business here to be built, I had called some of the private equity folks that had heard about what I was doing, people I had known from my private equity days who were interested in investing in Genea. But I'm like, hold off, let me just make sure this thing's going to make it before I take on any capital. As soon as I realized there's a business to be built here, I started raising a little bit of capital, not from firms, but individuals that are private equity minded, but investing personally. So did a couple rounds of that, fixed the balance sheet, recruited a brand new team, and came up with a new go-to-market strategy, fixed price model, no upfront costs. And the whole wrapping on the new business strategy was to really do I have a firm belief that technology is only valuable if it's easy, and people don't do business with technology, they do business with people. And so one of the core competencies that we were able to build very early on was customer service. Customer success, super, super important. So hired a brand new team, launched a new go-to-market strategy with fixed pricing, and slowly started building our way in. So, excuse me. We would, talk to a large real estate client, prospective portfolio, and it would be intriguing to somebody at the senior level, chief operating officer, head of operations, that level. And they would typically say, we'll give you a pilot building of maybe a building or 2. And then we would do a great job, execute it, and earn the right to do more.
Yeah, so that's really a really interesting thing, this idea of people and customer service being the catalyst for success in technology, because I guess a lot of people, probably the naive in business, think, I'm going to come up with this cool product or this cool technology and it's just going to sell itself. But the reality of it is that most of what was the catalyst for the success and growth of Genea had to do with not the actual technology, but how you packaged it and presented it and then fulfilled it with your team.
Yeah. So I guess the best way to bring an analogy to it is Apple didn't come up with the first smartphone, right? But it came up with a smartphone that my wife could pick up and without any instructions use it in a way that was intuitive. So technology is only valuable if it's simple. I would say the same thing happened with the Nest thermostat. Everything, if it's easy, technology makes lives better if it's easy. If I have to figure it out, if I have to pick up a manual to look at it and figure out how to use this thing, guess what? 99% of people just don't have the attention span or the willingness to do that. So with that in mind, I always said that as we roll this out, we need to have very clearly defined, quantifiable value props so that when I'm talking to a real estate owner, because ultimately that's the decision maker, that person says, hey, this will drive value incremental to what I'm paying this company, Genea. So, okay, that can make sense.
Well, and the commercial real estate industry, sorry to cut you off, is notoriously all about
the bottom line.
numbers. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's no.
And that's why my background's so helpful,
Yeah.
right? Because that's how I think. I'm thinking about the bottom line. So for me to be able to take that experience from finance and communicate it in a way where I'm very bottom line focused to the decision maker, that was one hurdle to overcome. Whereas right now, a lot of commercial real estate technology companies, they struggle with that, right? They like to sell the sizzle of cool technology, but then they have a really tough time quantifying a value proposition that this technology is going to be able to help derive for that real estate owner. And then, so that's one hurdle: is the decision maker needs to be willing to pay for it. And then, from an implementation standpoint, at the property level, remember the backdrop of a very busy team. They need to have the willingness to even try it. So just because the ownership wants to try it doesn't mean we think it makes sense for this specific property. So how do we make it easy? And that was really, as we launched the business, and our customer success team has done a great job just making it super easy. We don't send technicians out to market to implement our software. We do it all remotely, but we have just a great customer success team that says, here's how you do it, and we do it all via webinars. And part of our 73 NPS, or Net Promoter Score, is, oh my gosh, that implementation was so easy. A lot of people promise an easy implementation. Very few people deliver on it. And so time and time again, especially early on, I would check with our clients on a phone call a month and a half after we go live. How do we do? How do we do? And just kept on getting positive feedback. So that's where we started getting traction, was a building at a time. So
how many? So you mentioned it was a small team doing what? How much business was the company doing in like 2011?
So metrics. Business I took over in terms of number of buildings that were using the cloud service, there was about a dozen around the country. Now we're over 800 buildings around the country now.
Wow.
So in terms of square footage, roughly about 9 million square feet. And now we're like close to 180 million square feet.
Oh my gosh.
So we've grown quite a bit. And once again, it's earning the right of building at a time. So good examples of who we work with. Irvine Company is a very, a great client of ours. Brookfield, we started off with one building. Brookfield's the largest owner of office buildings in the country.
Okay.
So we started off with one building, and then they bought another building that had our service in it. And based on those two buildings, they hired a third-party engineering firm to analyze our value prop. So I give him a lot of credit for that, because the person who did that, I said, thank you, Kevin. And he was like, why are you thanking me? I was like, well, you would only do this if you're thinking about doing more with us. And so now when you look at us with Brookfield, we are in their corporate headquarters in New York, the two buildings right next to it. We have essentially their entire downtown LA portfolio except for one building, and we have their entire Houston portfolio. So we're growing. That's my point.
Yeah.
And that story is true with most of the large real estate companies. So when you take a look at the top 20 largest owners of office buildings in the country, Brookfield, Irvine Company, Hines, EQ Office, we're in business with 15 of the top 20.
Wow.
And we're growing with every single one.
And because of the ability to implement remotely, there's really no limits on who and where you can work.
Very scalable. That's the nice thing. One of the questions that comes up all the time is, is international possible? Absolutely. We're cloud-based software, and so that is definitely on the horizon.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, so transitioning a little bit, Zach, as we wrap things up, thanks again for sharing about your background and your story.
Sure.
One question I always ask all of our guests is, assuming there's people who are listening to this that maybe are in manufacturing or a service business or also in technology of sorts, what is something that you have learned over your career, or a lesson that you have that you think translates across industries?
Sure. Having never, ever run anything in my life before I took over Genea, it's a great question. What do I rely on in terms of building this business? There's really two things that I'll share. One is have a really good support group. So YPO has been that for me. When I transferred from LA down to Orange County, I transferred to a new YPO group down here. And that group has been immensely important to me because as I don't have all the answers to all the questions that were coming up, just to have that very intimate, confidential support group to bounce ideas off of was critical for me, and I learned a ton. So it doesn't help me from making all the mistakes, but it definitely helps me to mitigate the mistakes, and if I'm making a mistake, to lessen the impact. So I would say that was important. And then the other thing was, what I relied on more than anything I learned in my professional career when I took over Genea was I probably relied on my experience coaching my kids in basketball. And that was, how do I hire individually talented people, but in terms of building a successful company, like you would a team, is come up with a game plan and clearly communicate what the game plan is and have them communicate and work with each other, right? That's essentially what we've used as our strategy with Genea, is I am incredibly transparent with what our goals are as a company, from my senior team all the way down to the newest employee. Everybody knows what our mission is because I talk about it all the time. And I'm also very transparent with where we are financially. So everybody, a lot of what I see impacts a lot of companies is, what do I not know what's going on? And so it occupies people's minds of like, I'm not in the know. I'm a cog in the wheel. Everybody knows exactly what's going on. And that's part of our culture. It's a culture of trust, a culture of teamwork. And we work hard at that. And so I remember as an investment banker or a private equity guy, we'd meet with a new company and they'd talk about their business. And I'd spend a lot of time analyzing the strategy, marketplace, industry, all that stuff, very focused on it. But as soon as a management team would talk about culture, I would literally just I got to go to the bathroom. Where's the snack? I need a glass of water. I would just tune out. I have learned that culture is everything.
Wow.
Culture trumps strategy big time. And we rely on that quite a bit. As a management team, we had our management retreat last year. We spent 95% of our time focused on the culture.
Wow.
Versus any kind of strategy. And obviously, depending on where you are as a company, that can pivot in terms of the needs of the business. But that's really helped us get to where we are right now.
How do you like being a CEO?
Yeah, interesting. I've learned a lot about myself, and I've learned a lot about what it takes to be an effective CEO. Just sharing something I learned recently. Being transparent, I do get feedback from my team, and I think one of the responsibilities that a lot of leaders have, whether you're a CEO or head of a division or whatever, is everyone vibes off of your energy. And so if you're not feeling well, it's hard to not let yourself just not feel well, right? But you can't really, as an effective leader, have your energy go down because everybody follows that suit. And so I've really made a commitment, especially in this year, to just make sure that I keep my energy high. And that means taking care of my body, taking care of my mind, so that I don't have to force it. It's just naturally there. But I've seen a very impactful response across my entire management team. And then I remind them they have the same responsibility as it relates to their team. Because if they vibe low, everyone follows. Like, what's going on? Like, what am I missing? What's going on with Michael? Is there something wrong with the company? So I've enjoyed it.
You have. So you went from this very cut and dry evaluating numbers to this role where it's about people and managing expectations and communication and stuff. And so that, I'm sure, had its challenges, but also probably has its rewards in that as well, I would imagine.
Outside of the performance of the business itself, which I'm extremely proud of, I'm most proud of the culture that we've built. I'm proud of the fact that we've grown careers, hired people straight out of school, and now some of those people are running departments for us and seeing them grow. Very rewarding in that respect. And that was the same type of feeling I had when I was coaching my kids in basketball, is seeing kids who couldn't dribble all of a sudden scoring games or points in games, and now those kids are playing at a high school level, at a very high level. So that's gratifying in a much different way. Yeah, the culture in private equity is really a culture of money. So you don't really spend much time on it. It's who wants to make money,
Yeah.
and that's the culture.
Yeah.
Versus, I would say in the corporate world, what I've seen, not just in my business, but in a variety of different businesses, is people want to be a part of a winning team. And when you're spending that much time away from your family and friends and you're working, you want to like where you're working. And in this day and age of low unemployment, they have plenty of choices. So if you want to be a successful company, create a culture and in a work environment where you could get a lot of things done. So it's not romper room, but you can get a lot of things done in a very high energy environment.
Cool. Muzzleload round, transitioning a little bit, so some just different questions. You alluded to this already, but what have you accomplished in your business that you're most proud of?
I would say culture.
Cool.
Yeah.
If you could go back in time, what would you tell the younger version of yourself?
That's the hardest one for me to answer. I would slap myself on the head and, don't be such a knucklehead. I would say there's a process to everything. I'm learning this through my 18-year-old, my 16-year-old boys, is that they put more pressure on themselves than anybody. And so allow yourselves the ability to make mistakes, because that's part of the process. And another thing I've gotten from YPO colleagues and people that have graduated out of YPO is you learn so much more about your failures. Right now, my kids are of the college mindset of like, I have to get into the right school. I have to get in the right school. And from what I've gathered, getting into the right school for you is more important than the right school on a piece of paper to brag about. Because more often than not, the best people that we've hired haven't come from the elite schools. It's a piece of the puzzle. It's not the only piece of the puzzle. And so just allow yourself to kind of, enjoy the process. And grit and perseverance is going to be more important than anything else.
What are you reading, listening to, or subscribe to currently for personal and or professional development?
I would say I tend to synthesize information best through conversation, and so more of it is just leveraging YPO colleagues and just networking and hearing from peers. I have read a book recently called The Breakthrough Company that I thought was well done. It was an analysis of 7,000 I think it was Inc. 500 fastest growing businesses, studied them over a 5-year period, and really tried to figure out what were common denominators of the ones that broke out from a mid-sized company or a smaller business to something that was sustainable. And there was 9 businesses that had common traits, so he kind of walks through those traits, and I thought that was interesting. In fact, I just bought a dozen of those books, and I threw them around my office and said, please read this.
Cool. That's the one by Keith McFarland.
Yeah, exactly.
What habits, routines do you have to stay on top of your game?
Mentally healthy requires me to be physically healthy. So if I let myself go and I don't get a workout in, I'm not a very nice person. And my energy level definitely goes down. So I need to maintain some physical activity.
Cool. Well, thanks again for your time today, all your insights. I feel like I'm going to have to re-listen to this myself, and I'll probably learn something new every time. So I appreciate your time and sharing more about your story.
Thank you.